Here's your host, Alex Garrett.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Garrett, and it's been an emotional weekend if you've been following the fact that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Army, actually rescued 4 hostages from, get this, a Gaza journalist home. There were 3 hostages there, and overall they rescued 4. And the journalist I trust to talk about all this is Shaiel Ben Ephraim, Shaiel Media. Welcome back to the Alex Garrett Podcast Network.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be on here with you.
I want to start with the Gaza journalist. I mean, come on. The whole woe is me that this Free Palestine movement is talking about wants to neglect the fact that even journalists are pro-Hamas sympathizers. That pisses me off, Shaiel. It's very disturbing that a journalist is found to have kept 3 hostages. Doesn't that disturb you as a journalist yourself?
It disturbs me very deeply. I wish I could say it surprises me, but it disturbs me very deeply. Listen, Al Jazeera is a Qatari government media organization where Qatar is the lifeline for Hamas's existence. Al Jazeera is the official, or I should say unofficial, mouthpiece for Hamas to the entire world, legitimizing their numbers, their message. We know that Al Jazeera uh, members were part of October 7th. Not surprised that they're part of keeping hostages as well. They're just an integral part of the way Hamas operates. Not only how they get their message out, but also their day-to-day operations. They're in there with them. The separation between the two is kind of artificial, especially in Gaza.
Well, this journalist specifically, I heard, was a spokesman for the Hamas labor ministry. It just all sounds very corrupt and very. The terrorists are in bed with the journalists. That's kind of what the vibe I get when I read something like that. And now the IDF went to this journalist home. Is that what happened? And they were able to get 3 hostages out? Tell us what happened. I mean, you have friends in the IDF, and I don't know what they've been telling you that, it has been told already, but tell us from your perspective how this all went down this weekend.
Yeah, so on Thursday already, um, Israeli military intelligence, Shabak, identified the location of hostages, realized that with a properly planned operation, they could get these people out. Um, so they very quickly built models of these houses, took some elite units and had them train in storming those exact buildings so they knew what the weak spots were, they knew where they were likely to face fire from. Then on Friday at 11 a.m., um, when it looked like opposition wouldn't be as fierce as it might be on other days, they brought soldiers in disguised as Arabs. If you've ever seen Fauda, that's how they often approach targets, and it was exactly like that. Then there were drones circling the houses to wait for a moment when defenses were low. Both targets had to be struck simultaneously. Otherwise, a we're talking about 200 meters between the 2 houses, both houses inside um, the marketplace in a crowded refugee camp. So you had to strike both of them. Otherwise, the people in the other apartment would know and either try to escape with the hostages or kill the hostages. So both were struck at the same time. Noar Gamani was located on the first floor of a building. The 3 guys were located on the 3rd floor of a building. Argamani was taken out easily. There was very little resistance. In fact, she didn't hear any shots. The first thing she knew was when someone knocked on the door and said, "We're the IDF. We're here to rescue you." It was more complicated in the other apartment. The individual, the soldier, no, I should say, the police commando who led the assault on the apartment was shot dead. There were other injuries as well, but the terrorists were taken out before they could kill the hostages. Argamani was put into a small armored vehicle that was drove into the center of the marketplace. A Hamas terrorist was about to shoot a RPG rocket at them and was taken out in the last second by a drone. So she almost was killed. They managed to get out there without being fired at. The other apartment, because of the delay, was not as fortunate. Their vehicle was shot at several times, but no one was killed. Then the Air Force had to be brought in to clear a path to them to a relatively secure location where a helicopter landed. You need a special clearance to land a helicopter like that. That helicopter took them over to Israel under a lot of cover, and that's when there were a lot of casualties on the Palestinian side because they engaged that vehicle with a lot of firepower, and the Air Force answered back with even more firepower. Um, what I'm hearing is that most of the people killed in the marketplace were combatants, not civilians, but there were certainly civilians that were killed too. Some of the pictures you've seen of civilian casualties are authentic, others not necessarily so. But everyone came out safe and sound in terms of the hostages. One Israeli police commando killed, several soldiers injured, no one too severely. And it's considered one of the great IDF military successes of the last few decades.
I mean, it is a success to get four of them. And, you know, I don't know. Last time we talked, it seemed like they were just dealing with Iran's assault on Israel. But have they been planning these rescue operations? Because this is the first time I've really heard of them successfully getting hostages out. Have this been going on and not really been reported? Or what, how successful have they been? Is this one of the first successful operations to get these hostages out?
Okay, so this is the third successful operation to get hostages out. There was one early on with Orit Magadish. Didn't get too much coverage, but they got one hostage out very early on. Then there was an operation in Rafah, taking out two male hostages from an apartment, very successful, and got less profile than this. And then there was this one with four. There have been other failed ones. The failed ones don't get as much press coverage, and some of them are censored. But there have been attempts to rescue others, and failure has either involved them being moved to another place, or in one case, from what I've heard, two hostages were killed by Hamas during the attempts to release them. There's constant attempts to locate the hostages and get them out on a daily basis. There's a unit in the Shabak and there's a unit in the IDF who have no other job but to do that. I don't know how often operations are actually launched. I would estimate about once a month there or something like that. There's an attempt. We don't always know about it.
Now, I know Shaiel Media has been covering all this, right to the very minute. So I want to get back to a week ago when once again, Israel had to grovel to Hamas. And what I mean by that is I feel like Hamas has everybody by the you-know-whats, and that bothers me. It bothers me that Hamas has so much say over what's going on, and they're a terrorist organization, and it does seem like Israel has to plead with them. That shouldn't be the case. Tell me about the latest ceasefire, though, proposal, because Israel keeps coming to the table, right? And Hamas keeps rejecting them as well.
Yeah, so you're right to be bothered because a lot of people are getting the wrong idea of what's going on in the battlefield. They hear from the Israeli government and from social media voices that are, touting the government line that Israel's doing well. So those of us who are Zionists, um, abroad especially, have a bit of a warped idea of what's happening in the war. And in reality, the war is not going particularly well for Israel. And that's why right now the terms of negotiation are not particularly good for Israel because as much as Israel has succeeded in terms of taking over parts of Gaza and killing a lot of terrorists, they haven't been able to achieve the major goals, which are replacing and destroying Hamas, freeing the hostages, the seven hostages who have been freed, accepted, killing Sinwar. And the real thing that's been hurting Israel more than anything else is the deterioration of its international standing. The suits in the ICJ, the arrest warrants in the ICC, countries cutting off trade, crises with the United States, so on and so forth. Um, Hamas is enjoying that very much and waiting to see how badly Israel is damaged. Israel knows right now that it doesn't have a chance to win anytime soon, and its international standing keeps getting worse and worse. So that's why it's willing to come a lot closer to the Hamas position than anyone thought. And Netanyahu has been hiding that, and he even pretended that the offer that he made was an offer made by Biden, but that's not the case. The Israeli position right now is very weak. Two things have made it a little bit stronger in the last few days. This rescue, taking over the Philadelphia corridor, those are good developments. That still doesn't make up for the other things that I talked about. Right now, Hamas has the upper hand because it just doesn't appear clear how Israel can win anytime soon without damaging its international standing even further.
I want to say the hostages, beyond being Israeli, are Jewish. And am I wrong to say that anybody who defends these kidnappings is anti-Semitic? I feel like they are. If they're defending the kidnapping of Jewish people, that's anti-Semitic at its core. And I'm not afraid to say that on this podcast or on my social media at this point. I'm getting fed up, Shaiel.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think anyone who's supporting Hamas and their acts of terrorism and violations of human rights, intentional ones, unlike Israel, where it sometimes does it unintentionally or not as a matter of policy, because they're committed against Jews, is being without a doubt anti-Semitic. They're supporting terrorism. They're being anti-Semitic. I don't think that if an organization was doing this to civilians anywhere else in the world, people would be going around justifying it like this. You didn't see a lot of people going around justifying Boko Haram, snatching a bunch of girls in Nigeria. And this is pretty similar.
All right, there are two other facets that I think are kind of working in tandem, though not intentionally. The college campuses, the UN are also virulently promoting anti-Semitism by letting all of this play out on their campuses and within the UN walls. I don't understand why, especially the United Nations, does not have Israel's back, even during this. It just ticks me off. And by the way, I lived across the street from the UN for about the first 10 years of my life. So seeing that building now, I see it in a different light, believe me.
You're a New Yorker. Yeah. So, well, those are two very different things. The UN, we forget sometimes that the UN doesn't really exist on its own. It's more the weight of international public opinion than it is the United Nations. And in in the United Nations, countries have made various deals to help each other try to achieve certain goals. And the Muslim countries, the Arab countries, have come to deals with other developing world countries to demonize Israel in exchange for alliances on other issues. This is a problem that Israel's had for decades. It's nothing new. It's actually unrelated to this conflict. The conflict gives them more ammunition, but the problem is unrelated. This has been happening for decades, regardless of what Israel does. Campuses are different. It's a deterioration there that we never had before. It's true that there's always been anti-Israel activists on campuses in the United States, but it's never been anything like this. In fact, there's never been political activism on any campus like this since the protests against Vietnam, at least that I'm aware of. I think in the 1980s there was anti-nuclear protests. I don't think they reached this level. And this didn't just happen in a vacuum. For many years, Qatar, and again, we get to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, other countries have contributed vast amounts of money to the elite universities in the United States. Not coincidentally, the universities where we've had most of these problems. We haven't had most of these problems in, state colleges and community colleges. We have them in the elite universities, the ones where Qatar and Saudi Arabia have spent a ton of money, and they've promoted classes that demonize Israel and link it to a sort of philosophy of oppression that the American left and the universities were already teaching very successfully. And I think that, along with the activity of foreign agents and troublemakers, perhaps hired by foreign governments, whether knowingly or unknowingly, have created these protests. These aren't organic. There's a lot of kids who are going along with it because it's the cool thing to do, but it didn't become the cool thing to do organically. There are a lot of people who are doing this intentionally.
Well, let me ask you this because you're in UC, you're on the coast in LA, so I'm sure you saw what was going on in UCLA. I mean, they wouldn't even allow Jewish students to uh, pass basically checkpoints. That was the most hurtful, really, thing to see, and upsetting thing to see. Just like here in Colombia, they wouldn't even allow Jewish students to come back to campus. They were so letting the pro-Palestine and pro-Hamas movement run their campus. It's very disturbing. Do you hope, Shaiel, that these campuses face backlash, meaning no donors anymore, or loss of donors, loss of funding? Do you hope that happens?
I mean, yes, but not in order to destroy these universities, in order to change their priorities. I think that there's a lot of people who are say that they're against these protests and say that they're pro-Israel, but their real intention is to sabotage and hurt the universities, something that they've been wanting to do for a very long time because they're woke or whatever. And we have a danger here, turning against these universities, wanting to defund these universities, etc., which A is not something you do in a democracy, and B, America, one of the reasons America is so powerful and so great is because we have these wonderful institutions. You know, Yale and Harvard and Columbia, UCLA, Berkeley, etc., are wonderful universities. They're some of the best universities in the world. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We want maybe to cut funding for a while in this way or that way so that they do better. But we want them to remain strong, powerful universities and teach values that are good for America and good for our society, not teach them to hate America, not teach them to hate Israel, not teach them anti-Semitism, not teach them to support terrorism, but continue to teach all the wonderful things they do, you know, when it comes to science and history, maybe not in the Middle East right now, philosophy and so on and so forth. So we have to be very careful what we're asking for here. We want them to crack down on this activity, but we don't want them to lose what makes them great universities.
And maybe fire professors along the way that are spouting all of this stuff in the classroom. And you know,
Anti-Semites, pro-terrorist professors, absolutely.
and you know, I've been talking to some people. A lot of people starting to homeschool their kid even at the high school, elementary level because they're worried it's all trickling down. And I guess it is, right? So this is a wide reform that has to happen, not just at the college level.
Yes, we have a serious problem here that starts at very low grades in many schools. I saw that in Portland, they're trying to teach kids in kindergarten about Palestine and all this stuff. We need to get this stopped. And it's not just about Israel. Hatred of Israel has to do directly with hatred of the United States. When you're taught that the United States is an evil country, a settler colonialist country that's built on genocide and built on Jim Crow and slavery and all these things, and its foreign policy is evil, you start to hate your own country. You start to hate other democracies. You start to support America's enemies. This is something that the United States really needs to deal with. Um, it's going to end up weakening us, and it's also going to end up spurring fascism because people don't want their kids to be like this. It's a very dangerous thing. It far transcends Israel.
Absolutely, and that's why I say beyond being Israeli, these are Jewish lives we're talking about. That's really at the heart of it, and why this is such a heated issue. Beyond the state of Israel, the people of Israel, right? That's what we're talking about here.
I would
So
say
yeah,
the soul of America is at stake. I would say it's more than
absolutely.
Jews.
Yes. With the whole, on the whole, it's like we're one. It feels like we're on the doorstep of completely ruining the fabric of the country, and we can't have that. Now, elections, will they determine this? Everybody's saying it's the biggest election ever, and I know last time we talked, you were very pro Biden. Has that changed at all in the way he's reacted to all of this, or is it still kind of? Do you feel like he's doing a decent job at all of this handling of Israel, and the conflict, and even what's going on the college campuses? I don't, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think we all wish Biden was doing more, but he's doing a lot in terms of he had a task force to deal with anti-Semitism. He had a task force to deal with this. He supported Israel with weapons. He's provided veto power. He's negotiating a ceasefire. He sent um, carriers to deter Iran. He just gave intelligence that helped with these rescues. The Biden administration is doing a hell of a lot for Israel and for American Jews, and most importantly, really, it's what's standing between us and what I believe is the Trump administration that would be a threat to the very fiber of our democracy and our society. So I don't think that the Biden administration is doing anything particularly wrong. Do I wish it was doing some things differently? Absolutely. But the alternative is absolutely horrifying. And for Jews, it will not be better if we're under a dark authoritarian man with criminal tendencies who I don't think harbors us any good intentions at all.
Well, I know he's criticized Netanyahu. I mean, I remember last year he actually complimented Hezbollah and the terrorists over Netanyahu, which just blew my mind. Did Trump? Do you remember that, Shaiel?
I absolutely do remember that. And I also have noticed that he keeps saying very bad things about liberal Jews, that they're not real Jews, they don't support Israel, they hate themselves. He's trying to divide us. I also hear a lot about how he admires Hitler. I am not a fan. And I think that now that the American right is becoming more anti-Semitic and more anti-Israel, they're linking up with the extreme left. Trump is going to be tempted to be less pro-Israel. He's already not particularly pro-Jewish in terms of Jews that don't slavishly follow his policies. And I just think that even if none of that was true, he would turn America to a dark authoritarian direction that's never been good for Jews. We're better off under middle of the road liberal democracy than anything authoritarian. Our history shows that over and over again.
So you don't see a hope for the Abraham Accords to happen again, right? Is that what I'm hearing? Because I loved what he did with the Abraham Accords. It kind of united the Middle East at that point, didn't it?
I think the Abraham Accords are vastly overrated. In fact, I would say the Abraham Accords have failed. I'm not going to lie and pretend that I was against them at the time. I wasn't. I was for them. Everyone was for them. In retrospect, they were a real problem, not because they pursued better relations between Israel and the Gulf states. That's great. But because they bypassed the Palestinians. There was a Trump plan for the Palestinians, but it wasn't serious. It wasn't negotiated with any actual Palestinian leadership. Instead, a plan was offered where Israel didn't have to do anything, was going to continue to build settlements, and it made Palestinians feel like pursuing anything diplomatic was pointless, that there was no one to talk to. The United States is completely on Israel's side. Israel has no intention of talking to them and creating a state ever. The Palestinian Authority is unable to achieve anything through diplomacy, and that really played into Hamas's hands. And one of the things that happens in international relations is that when a country or a group feels ignored by the political process, they will often go to violence in order to get people's attention to their plight and regain their seat at the table. And that is what the Palestinians have done in the most horrifying way possible. They've done this before in the first Intifada when they felt that the PLO was being marginalized. It was kind of predictable in a way. And without the Abraham Accords and without the Trump plan, may not have happened. The best way to have avoided what happened, this is an unpopular view, would have been to be talking to the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority for the last few years and trying to resolve this directly and
By
not
the way,
bypass it with Arab states.
you can hear a lot of this on Shaiel's latest podcast. I know he posts a lot. He said his newest show is How Did Israel Rescue the Hostages and what it means for the war, and talks. I'm sure you cover some of this in these different podcasts you do and
Yep.
whatnot, vlogs for Shaiel Media on Patreon. Now, the debate's coming up, and I'm glad I have you before the debate because I feel like the verdict and Israel might be the two big talking points that both try to cover here, right? So what's your advice, for either of them when they talk about these different issues because they're both to me of equal importance. Maybe not to many, but to me they're both equally important. How they're talked about in the debate, right?
What was your question again? I kind of missed something there. What's equally important?
So I would say the verdicts that came down in Manhattan, and then of course what happened in Israel might be one of the two of the biggest talking points that hopefully get covered in the debate. Are you hoping to see those two get equal time, or do you think the verdicts are going to dominate every part of that debate? What are you thinking there?
Oh, do I think Israel is going to be in the debate? Is that what you're asking?
Or
Yes,
be a prominent part of it? I feel like it should be, but maybe it won't be. What are your thoughts?
it will be. It will be. I normally in American elections, when there's so much on the line and there's so much drama regarding, well, this isn't a normal election to begin with, these trials and all that, you would think that Israel would get no attention. But because the war has been so prominent and the demonstrations have been so prominent, they're probably the number one foreign policy issue right now. I would say they overtook Ukraine because of the domestic repercussions and all the demonstrations and so on and so forth. Um, and everyone is very curious what Trump is going to say. We know what Biden's going to say about the war. We hear him all day long talking about the war. We're not really sure what Trump is going to say. He says different things depending on his mood, and that will be asked for sure. More than one question. I think we're going to hear questions about the war itself, and we're going to hear questions about the demonstrators. And I
And what
think
would your advice be to both candidates when dealing with this? Obviously, Trump can't go up there and criticize American Jews. That's just not going to work, right? So he's got to find a different approach.
Trump's job is really easy. I don't know if he's going to do what he needs to do from his perspective, but it's very easy. He needs to focus on the demonstrations. The demonstrations look really bad for Biden. They make the left look bad. They make immigration look bad. Um, they play to all his strengths. And he sometimes wavers and doesn't do what's best for himself politically. But I think on this, his instincts will serve him right. He will focus on um, how these are demonstrators. They're Biden's demonstrators. Some of them are immigrants. They support terrorism. Biden's, lawmakers like AOC and Tlaib are support them. Link it to Biden, link it to immigration, link it to terrorism, link it to the Democrats being weak on crime and all that kind of thing. That plays to his strengths.
Now,
One
when
thing,
you say that, do you
yeah,
personally believe that also? Do you feel like that's all linked and it, going against Biden here in 2024? Do you personally feel that also?
I don't feel like any of this is because Biden's doing anything wrong, but that doesn't change anything. If there's a sense of chaos from the left, that is good for the right. That's just how things work. That's what happened in 1968 when Hubert Humphrey ran against Nixon. There were demonstrations, anti-war demonstrations. They were against Hubert Humphrey, who was the Democratic candidate, but they were still linked to him. And Nixon ran on a ticket of law and order. And if there's anything that Trump learned from that campaign, he often talks about law and order. He remembers what Nixon did. He remembers how Nixon won. He's going to channel that and it's going to work. I'm not saying it'll necessarily mean he'll win the elections, but it's a winning topic for him. It's a losing topic for Biden. Biden doesn't really have a strong leg to stand on here because he will criticize the demonstrators, but he can't go after demonstrators too much because some of his base agrees with them. So he's got a real problem. And Trump can easily go against them because everyone in his base is against them. The war is a bit more complicated for Trump. I think he has a lot of supporters now who don't like Israel. I think a lot of people on the MAGA side have kind of flipped, but not enough for him to just turn against Israel. So there he's probably going to say some garbled things about being pro-Israel, but his focus, if he's smart, will be on the demonstrators. And I think he'll be asked about it, and I think he's going to hit a home run with that one. That might be some of his strongest performances in the debate. That's my prediction.
Well, we'll have to see. Now, as far as leadership goes, right now we saw, and I called you in because there was an emergency meeting today, and Benny Gantz, one of the big um, real advisors to Netanyahu, has resigned. You don't think the U.S. played a role in that, right? That's just their internal conflict going on. Or did we play a role in something like that?
The U.S. played a role in that. Yeah, they definitely did play a role in that. Um, but not the deciding one. I think that what the United States wanted to do when they revealed the Israeli offer of May 29th to Hamas, what they wanted to do was to keep Gantz in the government. They don't want to remove Gantz from the government because
What
they
was
know
his
that
role for those who may not be familiar with what he's been doing for Netanyahu?
Benny Gantz was the head of the biggest opposition party when October 7th happened. Then there was a major call in Israel for all the parties to go into an emergency unity government. He agreed. Yair Lapid, the other big head of the opposition, did not. Gantz went in, didn't get any portfolios. So he was a minister without portfolio, but what he did get was an appointment to the war cabinet. And he became, along with Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, one of the three major people shaping this war. So him leaving, and the most moderate voice among them. So, sorry, him leaving um, means that the moderate side of the government loses a lot of power, and the extreme right-wing side of the government gains a lot of power. And up until now, the two more extreme right-wing voices in the government, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, have had a sort of a veto power in the government, but now they'll have a lot more of a shaping power in the government, and that's important. And just as important as the fact that they're going to have a shaping power is how much damage this will do to Israel's standing in the world, because Ben Gvir and Smotrich are radioactive. The world has identified them as bad actors, and the more power they have, the easier it is to demonize Israel, put sanctions on it, make it pay costs internationally. Benny Gantz was a fig leaf, not a particularly effective one, but a fig leaf on this government, and now the government stands naked in front of the world as an extreme right wing one, and that's going to have some serious repercussions.
Now, pardon me if I'm wrong. Didn't he beat Netanyahu a couple elections ago, or am I thinking of someone else?
You're thinking of someone else. Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett. Bennett is currently out of politics. He'll be coming back. Yair Lapid is running another party, a little bit smaller, beat him together and formed a coalition government for a year and a half that was more moderate and, in my opinion, a much better government, but it fell. Part of the reason that it fell was because it relied heavily on Arab votes, and a lot of Israeli voters didn't like that. And that led to Netanyahu regaining power.
And we both talk about this. We don't know if Netanyahu is going to survive the next election. I personally don't think he will, right? It just seems like he won't.
Well, one thing I've learned in life is to never write off Benjamin Netanyahu. I've often made that mistake in the past. Oh, he has no chance. He's done now. He's toast. No, never write that guy off. Um, he's doing a little bit better in the polls than he was before, and if it's up to him, he will wait until he's doing a lot better before calling elections.
While
So
I have you, oh, sorry.
yeah, so he's smarter than everyone else. He knows the system better than everyone else, and he may be able to, one way or another, survive. I wouldn't put it past him.
Well, I want to look at the U.S. Congress because we just mentioned a little while ago the the International Criminal Court, and I believe the House was going to sanction the ICC. Did that surprise you that they came out to sanction them? I mean, that's I know it's a right leaning House now, but to go in the foreign affairs like that, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I wasn't surprised. It's an attempt to outmaneuver um, Biden and show that he's weak on Israel and kind of divide the Democratic Party. Get the pro-Israel Democrats to vote with it. Get the anti-Israel Democrats to be outraged, embarrass Biden by showing that he's not willing to do everything possible to support Israel. So they're looking for weakness uh, in Biden's administration, and they found it. If they pass this, it puts pressure on the Democrats to pass it in the Senate too. Biden doesn't want that, so he needs to. If he's going to stop it, it's going to make him look bad before Jewish voters. They're trying to get Jewish voters and other pro-Israel moderate voters to jump ship and support Trump, so it serves their interests. Sanctioning the ICC in terms of actual policy is meaningless. the United States is not part of the ICC. Um, so it doesn't fund the ICC in any way. So it's symbolic. What it shows is the United States is against a major institution that, even though Israel has a lot of problems with how that institution is being run, is an institution that's meant to preserve international law and prevent genocide. So Biden doesn't want to be sanctioning this organization. He thinks it's enough that the U.S. isn't part of it. Um, yeah, so this is all politics. It's fairly meaningless. Biden doesn't want to do it because it jeopardizes his relations with some of his allies who are very heavily invested in the ICC, countries like Germany and France and Spain and countries like that. He doesn't want to start an entire front with them in order to make a symbolic point to defend Israel. That's what it's about.
Intriguing. Well, I'll have to look more into that. Now, as we're talking, you just mentioned Germany, France, and of course, this week was D-Day, and a little bit off topic, although I guess on topic because D-Day helped eliminate that global anti-Semitism known as Germany. Any thoughts on the 80th anniversary of D-Day as we just passed it this week?
Yes, well, I think anyone who loves the values that America stands for and the values that democracy stands for looks at that generation, the generation that defended all these values, that was willing to leave their lives in American farmsteads and small towns throughout the country in order to liberate Europe, and then look at how little Americans are willing to do today in order to defend democracy, and it's incredibly depressing. It feels like we're in a generation where people will say, yeah, I kind of value democracy, but we have some inflation, so maybe I'll vote against democracy. Or, yeah, I kind of value democracy, but I don't want to be taxed higher, so I'm not going to want to send money to the Ukraine to fight Russia. No one's willing to bear any sacrifice today for their values. And because a lot of people don't believe in the United States, don't believe in democracy, and don't believe in our institutions anymore, they don't believe it's worth paying any price to defend. And our enemies are willing, and by our enemies, I mean Iran, China, Russia, are willing to pay a lot of prices to promote their values and undermine us. And if we're not willing to fight back, we're going to end up losing our democracy, losing everything that's dear to us. And by the time we realize the mistake we have made, it will be too late. And, Colin Powell once gave a speech about D-Day, and he said that the United States, the only thing they asked for in exchange for the sacrifices that they made, the only land that they asked for were the cemeteries in order to bury the American dead. It was a generation that was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for democracy, and I wish we hadn't lost that.
Oh man, and to hear some of these guys 100+ years old still defending democracy and what they fought for is pretty inspiring, isn't it?
They're better people than us, my friends. They just are.
100%. All right, while you're in California, I got to ask this because my not conspiracy side of the brain, if you will, but my thought was, I mean, Gavin Newsom's still out there in California governing, but I feel like he wants a more national platform to maybe take the White House one day. Are you seeing that in his behavior?
Yeah, Gavin Newsom decided long ago that he's going to be president, and wants to be. I don't see it. I think that the days of sort of kind of smarmy, privileged white boy like Newsom taking the White House for the Democrats are gone. The coalition now is too fractious, too identity politics oriented. I think that his appeal, which would have been great in the 1980s, is just not that relevant anymore. It may be enough to win California, but on the national stage, I just don't think he has the right image. And I also don't think his achievements in California are particularly impressive. I mean, I live here and things are going
You mean
okay, I
not
guess.
wearing a mask while everybody telling you to wear, while telling everybody else to wear a mask? That's not electable. I didn't know that, Shaiel.
Yeah, but California has had some real issues with more than that, with its budgeting, with its education system, with the homeless, um, corruption. It just doesn't feel like the state's
Also had to
being run
survive
all
a
that well.
recall election too, which is also a big black mark on him that even went to recall, right? That's kind of a black mark on his record if you think about it.
Well, it's not that hard to have a recall here. And people organize recalls in order to besmirch politicians, often when they're powerful and popular. So I don't know if anyone takes that all that seriously. And I don't think it's an indication that Newsom is deeply unpopular. I think, he ran today, he'd probably win again. But he hasn't done enough of a good job, and he doesn't have the right profile to move to the national stage. So I could sort of see Newsom becoming, the next Pete Buttigieg and having a seat at the table in the government as a cabinet secretary or something like that. But president, I think that's a step too far for him.
Well, we'll have to see. I'm so glad we got a chance to catch up, Shaiel. And you talk so proudly of America. I have to ask, were your family growing up Blue Dog Democrats or very involved? Like, did they help instill these values in you? I gotta ask.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Israel. I didn't even grow up here, but both my parents are American. My mother is from Queens. My father is from Brooklyn. They both were moderate Democrats. Yeah, I guess they were Blue Dog Democrats before that concept existed. They voted for Reagan, but then they voted for Clinton, voted for Gore. They both hate Trump. So yeah, I got those values from them. And I'm an American citizen. I vote in the elections here. I'm also an Israeli citizen. I vote in the elections there. I take both of my nationalities very seriously. I'm very patriotic, and I feel that both the countries that I am a citizen of are forces for good in the world, but we can't be complacent about that, and we have to make sure that they continue to be forces for good in the world and that they continue to be democratic. So I feel very passionate, not only about patriotism, but about the right kind of patriotism, a patriotism that makes your country better so it could contribute to the world around you. And yeah, I absolutely got those values from my parents and the rest of my family.
Well, I'm a Queens guy myself, living actually currently in Queens as we talk. So there's that
Oh,
connection
yeah.
there.
Are you a
So
Mets fan?
I'm actually more of a Yankee fan, believe it or not. But
Uh,
that that happens. Well, Shaiel, it's been always a pleasure to catch up with you. Follow him at Shaiel Media, and you also run a podcast. How's your podcast been going before I let you go?
my podcast is called History of the Land of Israel, and there I do trace the entire history of Israel from the dawn of time, so literally the Big Bang, until I'm planning to get to today. Right now, I'm at King David. So yeah, join me for that journey. I hope to be doing that for many, many more years. And I have Shaiel Ben Ephraim Explains Israel. That's my YouTube channel. And follow me on Twitter too.
Sorry, as you moved there. All right, Shaiel, that is at Shaiel Ben on Instagram and Twitter as well. Find him there. Shaiel, thanks so much, and come on back.
Anytime you invite me, I'm here. Always a pleasure. Keep doing what you're doing, Alex.
Thank you. God bless you and be well. We'll keep in touch.
You too. Talk soon.